Welcome back to a brand new episode. It has been a while since I last recorded, and I've been wanting to record an episode for a while now. However, as some of you guys already know, I've been in my hometown, Amsterdam, for the past 3 months, and it was so good to be back, as it was so overwhelming to be back. So I decided to record a new episode whenever the time felt right, and that time is now. So today's episode is all about the inner child. We're going to dive deep into our inner child. I am so grateful that so many people have been becoming more and more aware of their inner child and how their inner child shows up in their lives. However, today I wanted to dive even deeper. Personally, I've been reconnecting with my inner child lately. A lot. I've done 2 days of silence with myself at home. And while I was there, I wasn't prepared for it. But it turned out that those 2 days were mainly to connect deeper with my inner child. Or actually, in my case, my inner teens. She wanted attention. And she wanted to be heard. And I only noticed this because I looked into a pattern that has been on repeat in my life. All I did was sit with that pattern and invited my inner child in there. And then I asked her, hey, do you recognize this situation or this feeling? And then the freaking floodgates opened. Let me tell you that she had a lot to say. And even though I've connected to my inner child a lot before, the 2 days of silence really was a catalyzer for everything my inner child had to say. She was like, great, your mind is still, there's stillness, so now I can get your attention. And my mind was blown away by all of the insight she gave me. Because self-development is literally what I do on a day-to-day basis with both myself and my clients. So because of that fact, I know that I know myself quite well. But I was still so shocked how much I hadn't heard from my inner child. So that inspired me to open up the space for others to connect deeper with their inner child. On that side note, I had been getting some sweet and gentle nudges from the universe that my inner child had more to say. So that was actually the whole reason why I sat her down and connected with her. And as I did that, I realized I needed to be doing that way and way more often. But sometimes in our busy life, we can lose track of our inner child. And I know that it's not just me, as I keep on hearing this from my clients as well. And it helps when there is space created for it, where you get to dive deeper into your inner child in a guided and structured manner. So, during my sessions, I so often and clearly see whenever people are going through cycles and patterns that their inner child are creating. And when I say creating, I obviously don't mean that our inner child goes around and think, you know what would be great? This situation in their lives again. And in a way, that is exactly what our inner child does. Because more often than not, our inner child is trying to protect us, trying to keep us safe, or trying to prove our worth to us through our patterns that are on repeat. And to be honest, I think often this is a forgotten part that we need to look into way more. Because I'm seeing in my sessions that most things we can trace back to our childhood. And I say most because obviously not everything is a reflection of our inner child. But to be honest, more often than not, that is what I see. How we see ourselves, how we relate to ourselves, to our outside world, our coping mechanisms, our fears, and yes, our patterns. More often than not, that is a little child asking for our attention or standing behind the steering wheel. So how does our inner child do that? Why is it that our inner child has so much control over us in our daily lives? Well, first of all, the first couple of childhood years are the most important when it comes to shaping our nervous system. So these very first experiences are crucial to our sense of safety, our sense of self, and our sense of relating to the world. Then life starts to happen. And as a child, we go through situations. And all we are wired to do in this life is survive, not thrive. Our system is wired for survival. That is crucial to know because we often make decisions based on how much chance we have to survive something, not how much chance we get to thrive in something. This is actually what often keeps us in the familiar patterns. Our system thinks, hey, I know the situation, and I know it well, and I came out alive. So why not let the situation repeat itself? Because it's safe for us. Even if that would mean the most unsafe situation you can ever imagine. If our system knows it deeply and survived it, it labels the situation as safe. I will give an example. If we grew up with emotionally abusive parents or whatever type of abuse, and we know that, we know how to navigate that. Our system wires that as safe. Maybe not as joyful, but as safe. So oftentimes people go out in the world and attract that same abusive partner or an abusive pattern. Because as crazy as it sounds, it is labeled as safe to our system. Now, if that same person goes out into the world and meets an emotionally available and safe person, that person is more often than not labeled as unsafe to a person who grew up in an unsafe environment. Now you might ask yourself, why is that? It's because you haven't learned yet how to survive in the presence of someone who is emotionally safe and available. So you would have to learn new things. Like, how do I cope with triggers? Or how to be vulnerable? Opening up your heart with the risk of getting hurt, etc., etc. Now your system that is wired for survival will of course not like that. These are new situations. It doesn't know how to navigate any of that. And in that system, vulnerability, for example, was always connected to deep unsafety. Because it literally was deeply unsafe to be vulnerable. So of course your system and your inner child, no, this is not the same thing, will try and navigate away from that. Now, if you are like most of us, these things happen subconsciously. We are unaware of it. We just notice attracting the same type of partners, the same type of situation. Now consciously, we're like, I want something more. I want something better. For example, I want an emotionally safe partner or a partner who is supportive or whatever it is that you want. But subconsciously, your inner child and your system are preventing that because it feels deeply unsafe to your system, deeply unsafe to your inner child. Now, this is a situation that is rooted in unsafety, but there are so many different patterns that can show up in the same way. To give another example, feeling not good enough, having negative self-talk. Now, this is often because of many, many other things in our lives. Whenever we don't feel good enough, or whenever we have a lot of negative self-talk, we often compensate for that and use coping mechanisms. One coping mechanism that can come from feeling not worthy, not good enough, is overcompensating. So constantly giving to other people, giving too much, and giving when you don't have something left to give. So this is a way to compensate for not feeling good enough. You trick your system into having a temporary feeling of feeling worthy and feeling good enough. But this is attached to giving. This is attached to how other people respond to us. So this is all temporary. And very exhausting because whenever this temporary response of appreciation or self-satisfaction of giving wears off, we get back to the actual thing we feel, which is not worthy and not good enough. So then we want to go out and give again and put other people first again so we can receive another temporary hit of feeling worthy. One painful thing is when we start to realize we do not give for others. When we start to acknowledge the fact that we don't give so much to others simply because we're loving or we're giving, but we're doing it to compensate for a feeling of unworthiness. Now, how is this connected to our inner child? Coping mechanisms often develop early on, and everyone creates a different coping mechanism. So, for example, for one person, the feeling of being unworthy can cause the coping mechanism of giving, putting other people first. And oftentimes, when you see this, you see in their childhood that this behavior was rewarded and was met with a response of praise. Now, as the smart child that you were like, wait a minute, this works. This gives me a good feeling. This makes me feel good about myself. Not recognizing, of course, since you were a child, that this is not an internal feeling of approval, but connected to external responses. Now, someone else might not feel good, worthy or good enough as a child and grow up in an environment where it's rewarded to achieve a lot. As a child, they receive praise whenever they accomplish something. Their parents seemed happy with them and gave compliments. This rush is then connected to a temporary feeling of temporarily feeling good enough and worthy. And again, as a young child, we don't recognize that this is actually a temporary feeling of worthiness and that this has nothing to do with actually feeling amazing about yourself as a person. But it is connected to something that you do, not something that you are. So this cycle has to be repeated often in order to maintain a feeling of worthiness and self-love. Because accomplishments are temporary. And accomplishments are covering up that actual feeling of unworthiness that's underneath. So as you're hearing, these are two very different coping mechanisms that are developed. So this also has to do with the type of person that you are. So in the same family, in the same circumstances, and let this be said, no person who grows up in the same family grows actually up in the same family. You all go through different things. You all experience different things. What you often see is in one family, everyone develops different coping mechanisms. It has a lot to do with, for example, one person being the oldest, the middle, the youngest. That's one factor. Then we have personality traits, or how we trigger our parents and how they respond to us, how our environment responds to us, etc., etc. So even in the same family, you'll see many different coping mechanisms to many different situations that are happening in a family. Now, some of you might already recognize some of your own coping mechanisms. And maybe you can already connect them to your inner child and when and where your inner child developed that coping mechanism. And then very important, maybe also the why. Because the why is actually what helps us to create compassion and understanding for the why. So that we can see what it is that our inner child needs. So now we've spoken a bit about the patterns that can be on repeat and why. But what is also important is some of the emotions that are still stuck in our inner child. Emotions like anger, fear, sadness, or grief. Whatever it is, sometimes our inner child doesn't recognize a new situation we're in. Knowing that we now can let go of old coping mechanisms and that it's safe for us to step into new things. Well, to help our inner child recognize that we have to see what it needs, sometimes this can simply be releasing some emotions. So to give another example, if we feel like people wronged or failed us, our whole life can be in the light of receiving the recognition that we were wronged. If we can't get that from our parents, we might go out and try to get that from other people. So the inner child in us feels seen and heard. But if we do this by trying to get recognition from other people in this life who wronged us, we have to continue to attract these type of people. Because we're only working on the surface. That inner child who is still angry for being wronged is still not seen, still not heard. So until the time we actually take the time to sit still and let our inner child express that anger, vent, or let it have all the tears that it needs to release, it will never be enough. So what we might see in our day-to-day life is us attracting people who wronged us and never apologize. So we get to have the chance to feel angry and upset, but over and over again. Because we're still not sitting with the root. And because we're not sitting with the root, it will never be enough. But it gives our inner child a little bit of that satisfaction of, you see, we get to release a little bit of that feeling. You see, they did us wrong. You see, I was right. It wasn't me, it was them. You see, and they still are doing me wrong. So they get to have like a little bit of an outlet for it. But don't get it wrong. This is not the real outlet. And that's why it has to be repeated over and over again. Because that root is still there. The feeling, that actual feeling that is rooted in your childhood, doesn't get to be expressed. So when we sit with our inner child, hear the hurt it has experienced in its childhood, hear the sadness it still carries with it, etc., etc., we'll give it a chance to truly process what happened to it when you were little. There, we can actually see what it needs. So to stick with this example, this inner child might actually need to hear, hey, it was not you. You are amazing, and it was not okay how you were treated. I need you to know that it wasn't you and that you deserved and still deserve better. You are worthy of way more. Now, these were a few examples of how our inner child subconsciously might show up in our day-to-day life and determine a lot of things. Now, what if by now you have that knowledge? You know how your inner child is feeling and you know where it is coming from and what it is trying to do for you by recreating these patterns. Now what? Is it all done? Actually, it can be. It can be that your inner child just needed you to see it. And sometimes your inner child needs more. It needs a deeper healing. And this is often the case when the patterns are strong or when there's a big unsafety around releasing certain coping mechanism. Or when there is something deeper within your inner child that needs to be expressed. And in that case, I give my clients homework specified to their inner child and what their inner child needs. If you signed up for my newsletter, you might have seen the newsletter with the 5 healing practices that I suggested for your inner child. If not, you can still sign up for the newsletter and then you'll receive these 5 practices. I will not dive in all these practices right now, simply because that would be too much and too long. But I will take one of these practices that I shared as an example, so we have an idea what to do after you've identified how your inner child is feeling and where your coping mechanism or your pattern was developed. So if you're noticing that what you've just discovered is just the tip of the iceberg, then this might help you to see a little bit more of that iceberg. So one thing that is very important is to give your inner child a sense of, hey, I'm close to you, and whenever you need me, I'll be here. Our inner child is us and we are them. So not paying attention to them or not seeing them means not seeing ourselves completely. So once your inner child knows that, I promise you, you will start to feel your inner child a lot more. What you can do to actively connect with your inner child is to take a picture of your inner child and then take a situation or a pattern in mind. And then ask your child, your inner child, if it recognizes feeling this way. And when was the first time they ever felt like that? Now give your inner child space to express and talk. Often our inner child needs space to be heard and feel safe, knowing that its voice matters. So I also created an inner child meditation to connect with some deeper parts of your inner child. So if you haven't done that one yet, you can also sign up for the newsletter and receive that free inner child meditation that can actually help you to get to some subconscious parts that might still be active or blocking you from seeing that. So whenever we sit with that question, when have you recognized this feeling? And when was the first time you ever felt that way? Maybe ask your inner child again. Was there a time before that you felt that? Or was this the very first time? Sometimes there's one memory comes to mind, but then if we ask a little bit more, they will come up with another memory that they might have also felt that way. And then really listen to your inner child. What does your inner child has to say about that situation or how they felt at that time? And whenever your inner child expresses, really be present with your inner child. See your inner child in front of you and give them the feeling of, hey, I'm here and I'm here to listen. Let them vent, let them tell you, and maybe take a journal, write it all down if that feels right. Or maybe you prefer to do it in like a meditative state. Whatever works for you. But what is very important is to give your inner child space to talk. We haven't listened. And often in childhood, our inner child or our child when we were children, we weren't listened to enough. We weren't seen enough. So I want to invite you to create that space for your inner child so you can actually hear what it has to say. So when I did this, in the 2 days of silence, I was blown away by all of the things that came up. So I really want to invite you to take the space and let your inner child talk before you're going to start asking questions. So give it time to talk, let it talk. And then you can ask, okay, how was that for you? What is it that you would have actually needed? Etc., etc. And again, I shared in that email, I shared a lot of different questions you can ask. So if you're interested in that, you can go and sign up and then you'll get the rest of the questions. And otherwise, just start with, hey, do you recognize this? Have you ever felt this way? And let your inner child talk. Now, when we talk about our inner child, it might sound as if our inner child is separate from us. But our inner child is in fact not at all separate from us. That's what makes it so important to connect to it. It is simply a part of us that is still stuck in that time. Still stuck with the feelings that were present there, and because of that, responding in ways that were beneficial at that time. In order to become free in life and create the life of our dreams, we have to become aware of our subconscious programming and release our subconscious programming. We have to first become aware of our subconscious drives, and our inner child is a huge part of that. If we do not bring it to the surface, it will determine our entire life, what we attract and how we respond to it. Until we choose to connect with it, face it, and see what it is that part of us needs, these things are stuck in our subconscious. If we're not aware of it, it will become bigger and more scarier and intenser. But when we connect to it, go through it, it more often than not isn't as scary or as intense as our subconscious mind has made us believe. Sometimes it can seem like a lot of work to connect with your inner child and sit with it. But let me tell you, it will cost you way more time. It will cost you way more if you ignore your inner child and let it run the show in the background of your life without your awareness of it. So during my one-on-one coaching sessions, I often work with my clients with their inner child and help them bring the subconscious programming to the surface and help them change that so they can release certain patterns. I often see in my clients, for example, them having a deep fear of connection to others. This is obviously not what they see. What they see is, hey, I have a deep desire to connect with others, yet I'm not attracting a deep connection to other people, whether it being romantic or in friendship. And it's because their inner child also fears it. And whenever we start healing the fear of our inner child, they start to also attract really deep relationships, both romantically and in friendships. And there are so many other ways that I work with the inner child during sessions. Whenever I see patterns or someone comes to me with a pattern that's on repeat in their life. And we simply connect with their inner child and see what is it serving? What is it giving you? And whenever you do that, whenever you connect with your inner child and go to that root and heal that part, those transformations are so powerful and lasting. And I wish this for everyone else, seriously. Now, my one-on-one coaching spots, I work with a wait list and there are limited spots available. So I've decided to make working with your inner child more available for more people. So I've created a group program where we'll dive deep into healing our inner child, deep with going to our roots, going to the roots of those patterns and connecting with our inner child and seeing what our inner child needs. So if you feel like that's me, I am really ready to dive deeper into the patterns of my life, connecting deep, deep, deep with my inner child, transforming some of the long-lasting patterns and things that are on repeat in my life. I've posted a link to the group program in the show notes. I've also have my information of WhatsApp or email in there. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and we'll be ready to answer any of your questions. So there will be limited spots available as I like to follow everyone's process closely. So make sure to sign up on time. All of the information is in the show notes. So to all of you, I say, I hope you have an amazing day or amazing evening. And before you fall asleep tonight, maybe embrace your inner child a little extra tonight. And I'm sending you all so much love. And until next episode.